BBC London.
It's 7:17 and the housing charity Shelters warn thousands of families in London will be forced to pay high private rents as council homes are sold off in huge numbers. The charity claims councils will have to sell homes they own to pay for the government's right to buy scheme, which is being expanded to include housing association properties. They're to be replaced though when sold on a like-for-like basis, and the council must find the money somewhere. John Bibby from Shelters told The Breakfast Show the sums simply don't add up.
Because of the way the right to buy works, the people who are going to be able to access it, the tenants who are going to be able to get the right to buy, get a very substantial discount, and in London that's up to £100,000. So obviously that leaves a considerable amount of money that needs to be met, and they're going to meet that through selling off council homes. So it's almost like selling off two affordable homes for the price of one.
Well, joining us now is Andrew Teacher, an independent property consultant. Good morning to you, Andrew. And no doubt you are rubbing your hands with glee and going, goody, 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 more cheaper flats that I can advise people to buy and then flog on or rent out.
Not really. No, I think that's probably a little bit unfair, Penny. But anyway, a lot of the people I work with are companies that are building new stuff, and I think this is the key point with all of these policies, is that what the Conservative government will tell you is that these proposals are designed to get people building more stuff. They will say that councils or housing associations should be replacing anything sold off and the money used to build new things. But the problem in London particularly is that there isn't that much land. Building is very expensive and it's getting more expensive. And the reality is that often the planning system and all of the other bureaucracy we have means that everything takes a hell of a long time. Shelters research, I think, like most of its research, is very well intentioned, and I think is raising a very, very important issue. Technically, they are right. It would be up to 60,000 homes, but that's a very worst-case scenario. And the reality is, in spite of the massive subsidy that it offers, discount it offers to people when buying a home, and whether you think that's right or not, obviously it's a political issue, it's a moral issue. But regardless of that figure, many of those 60,000 people wouldn't have a very tiny chance of being able to afford it simply because of the amount of deposit you need,
but nevertheless,
of mortgage regulations,
and all the money that they have to stump up first. But the point is, and we know that this sort of thing is happening, is that there are means and ways that you can, is that somebody else can sub you the money, then you can buy it with the agreement that you sell it to them a little bit later on. Yeah,
and the main issue people have with that is that the point of housing of Bright Spy in the first place was to create social mobility, and all it's done is allow people to play the system. But to some extent, that's what people do with housing. So, if you're creating a platform where people come in and get on the housing ladder and then rent them out, you can't then blame those people for doing that. But the central problem is that housing was politicised under Margaret Thatcher, the Conservative Prime Minister in the 80s, and that has continued under successive governments, and as a result of all of that, and as a result of the state refusing to take up house building as it did in the 80s, we've had a shortfall, and until the state turns the keys back in the ignition and starts building itself, you cannot continue to try and say the private sector will do this, housing associations, that they simply won't fill the gap. And I think the issue that Shelters are raising is a real one.
And I suppose it's going to unfairly hit London, some might say, because of the huge disparity between house prices here and elsewhere in the country, which is another point made to us by John Bibby from Shelter.
Yes, I think it's true, and to some extent, most people in the Westminster bubble seem to believe that this was one of those policies the Conservatives hatched up on the road during a general election, never thought they were going to get in with a majority, never thought they were going to have to implement it, and it was put in to some degree, people say, as a bargaining chip, and now they're being forced to actually implement it really to save face, and I think that's ridiculous. I think what would be much better would be to have a proper conversation around how we commence a state-funded building program, perhaps joint ventures with private developers. I mean, some of the businesses I work with that I advise on policy and consultancy, they are doing joint ventures, and what that means in plain English is that where a council in London might have an old office block, like near where I live in Haringey, they might have an old office block and they could do a partnership with a private developer who puts in the money. Council owns half of it, private developer owns half of it, they rent them out and they share the profits. And that could be a very good way of using what we have and getting something out of it for the taxpayer. And
I do wonder whether, I was over at King's Cross the other day. I was doing a thing about Boris bikes, don't ask. But I noticed that quite a few places there buildings that are looking a bit run down. They've got shop fronts. But you do wonder whether we shouldn't just say, right, we've got enough office space in the city. What we really need is more affordable homes. And let's just forget about, I don't know, little high streets. Maybe that's what we should say, is the high street...
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And I'll tell you why. As someone that runs a small business and employs 8 people, office space in the centre of London is at a massive premium. And we've had a lot of conversion going on. And to some extent, in some places, like in Archway in North London, where they've converted a terrible old 60s office, got the Archway Tower, which any of your listeners up in North London see it every day, and it used to be horrific.
I was going to say, that's the ugly one, isn't it?
Yes,
not far from Archway, the huge bridge.
Yes, on the Geraceous system, and that's being converted into homes for rent by a company called Central Living, and most would say, yeah, that's a great idea. No one's going to really demand that office space up in Archway, but I think in central London there is a massive supply crunch with offices, and why that matters is that it hurts small businesses, and small businesses that are looking to grow and perhaps become big businesses are being forced to pay sky-high rents, which is a massive, massive drain. So I think that the solution very much is not just to convert office space in central London.
I wasn't just thinking of office space, I was thinking of old shops and things like that, shops and pubs, yes.
But it's small beer, though, that's the problem. And you're right, where you can do, you should do, but I think it's important that you have really balanced communities, and the key thing to making London what it is that you've got all these ridiculously brilliant little pubs and bars and barber shops and cafes. And I think the minute these things start being just blotted out and carpeted with either flats or carpeted with offices or whatever, you need to have that mix.
Yeah.
Without that mix, the vibrancy gets lost, and the wonderfulness of London, I think, gets eroded. And that's just my opinion.
Andrew, thank you very much. That's Andrew Teacher, an independent property consultant. As soon as anybody says small beer, I do imagine a very small beer.